Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to What If You Were Stranded on the World's Most Remote Island, and it's by Real Life Law. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm just going to jump straight into the reaction. I've done a lot of long intros recently, so we're just going to jump into it. But yeah, I've been doing more reactions to this channel and I'm enjoying it, so long may it continue. Links are in the description to my Patreon. I'm going on holiday soon, so there's going to be more reactions on there as well if you want to see some more of my videos. But yeah, let's just check this out and see what this video teaches me.
This video is made possible by Micro Center. Get a free 128GB flash drive and 128GB micro SD card when you follow the link down in the description below. If you're watching this video and you live in a city, it might be hard to grasp how utterly remote the world's most remote island actually is. Let me put it this way. There are nearly 8 billion people living their lives in our world today, which is a really, really huge number. That's more than triple the number of people who existed as recently as 1950. While by and large, most of us today are congregating ever more into the same few places. Today, over 56% of all 8 billion of us live within cities, and in less than 30 years from now, by 2050, that share is estimated to increase up to 68% of us. And those are just the worldwide figures. In developed countries like the United States, the concentration of people living within cities is even higher at about 83%. While in the Netherlands, it's even higher still at an overwhelming 92% of the—
Well, I've done a video to the reaction to this channel was a picture that explained the history of the world or something, and the Netherlands was really lit up in so many areas, but then it was so like, it was just really lit up everywhere. Like the cities are so close to each other, so I did kind of assume that would be the case, I guess, after you mentioned it, because the lighting in the Netherlands was crazy compared to everywhere else. But 92%, only 8% of people living in smaller cities, in smaller towns and stuff. It's pretty wild.
The population. Largely because of that, despite there being nearly 8 billion of us worldwide, a lot of the world is still pretty empty. This is the United States, and the spots colored in green are the more than 4 million census block areas where not a single person currently lives. Nobody watching or commenting on this video lives within any of these green locations, and every other large country in the world has a pretty—
People live here? That's the most shocking thing from this video. There's people that live here, here, up here. Bro, what?
Similar trend. This is Canada, which is overwhelmingly empty of people. This is Brazil, which is also pretty overwhelmingly empty of people, while this is the United Kingdom, which also has a lot of areas in Scotland and Wales where there just aren't—
Yeah, the Highlands, it's not really possible, is it? To be honest.
Any people currently living. There are a lot of empty and desolate places across the world that would be horrible to find yourself stranded and lost in, far away from any civilization or people who could offer any help. But the absolute worst place on the entire planet to be stranded on, without a doubt, is in Norway. Well, not this part of Norway, but this part, this tiny little island far away from all of us in the South Atlantic called Bouvet. To say that Bouvet is remote would be a vast understatement. First of all, nobody lives here. It's completely uninhabited. Second,
I mean, I think the worst thing about it is it's just freezing cold. I mean, it's obviously remote, which is terrible, but living in there in those conditions would be terrible.
Of all, it's quite literally the most isolated piece of land anywhere on Earth, meaning that it is the piece of land that is the furthest away from any other land. The nearest other landmass is 1,700 kilometers away to the south, and that's just Antarctica. Besides that, it's 2,250 kilometers away across ocean from the nearest actually inhabited landmass, and that's just the tiny speck that is Tristan da Cunha Island. Population only 250. Besides that, it's 2,600 kilometers away to the nearest inhabited continent in southern Africa. This means that if you draw out a circle with a radius of 2,000 kilometers with Bouvet Island right in the center, and you were located on Bouvet, you would be the only human within that entire circle. And the circle would have an area roughly equivalent to the entire European continent. Imagine being the only human in Europe. And that's the level of isolation that you feel here alone. And this is all besides the point that Bouvet itself is incredibly tiny. Only 49 square kilometers in total area, which is only about half the size of Disney World in Orlando. But unlike
Which
Disney
is
World,
big, to be fair, but still.
93% of Bouvet is covered by a thick, icy glacier, and temperatures only average throughout the entire year at about -1 Celsius. It is a desolate, empty, isolated, and frozen wasteland in the middle of nowhere that for some reason belongs to Norway. The island is
Yeah, why would you want to claim an island like this? I mean, it's extra land, right? But there's literally nothing going on here. There's literally nothing going on
so
here.
remote that no human eyes ever even witnessed it until 1739, when a French ship sailed by it on an expedition but didn't land. Nearly a century went by until another group of humans even saw it again in 1808. This time a British ship, but once again they failed to actually land. The first 100% confirmed landing on the island took place in 1825, when a group of British sailors landed and claimed it for Great Britain. But then, after they left, nobody came back to visit the island again for another 68 years. Throughout the entire 19th century, there may have only been 4 ships who ever visited the island, and only one of those actually landed. The Norwegians finally arrived to the uninhabited and almost unvisited island only in 1927, when they built a
Wow.
hut, raised a flag, and claimed it for themselves, as the British had once done a century earlier. Back then in 1927, the British initially disputed Norway's claim to the island, but after giving it a second thought, they decided that Bouvet was A, tiny, B, didn't have any harbors for ships and didn't really have any resources, and C, was in the literal middle of nowhere that wasn't nearby to anything of even the most remote strategic importance. And so, the British relented and allowed the Norwegians to claim it, and today, Bouvet Island is Norway's only real overseas dependency, despite being located nearly 13,000 kilometers away from the capital of Oslo. And as you'd expect, there isn't really anything that ever goes on here. Since the island is so far out of the way from any inhabited location on Earth, ships sailing over the seas and airplanes flying above rarely, if ever, pass by it. The area is so absurdly remote and far away from any human civilization that you could probably even detonate a nuclear bomb here and nobody would ever hear or know about it. I say that because it probably literally already happened. Back in 1979, an American satellite flying above the area detected a double flash of light in the ocean nearby to Bouvet Island, the classic signature of a nuclear explosion. But nobody in the decades since has ever claimed any responsibility for the detonation. To this date, the information regarding the incident is classified by the United States government. But most researchers believe that the detonation was a secret, undeclared nuclear weapons test conducted jointly by apartheid-era South Africa and Israel, although both governments continue to deny any and all involvement to this day. But even just getting to Bouvet Island in the first place is a massive challenge. Since the island and the waters around it are protected as a nature reserve by the Norwegian government, you need strict permission to ever be allowed to visit, and those permissions are rarely ever granted. But let's pretend for a moment that right now, as you're watching this video, you were somehow teleported directly to the island as you currently are and just told good luck. How would you find your way to escape? What would you do to survive, and would it all even be possible? Well, there obviously isn't any cell service or Wi-Fi to be heard of on Bouvet, so your phone's gonna be pointless. With the average temperature being -1 degree Celsius, the first thing you're going to need to do is obviously find warmth. But there aren't any trees and there isn't any wood to build any fires with. And you probably don't even have anything to start a fire with in the first place, so that's going to be difficult. Maybe you think your best option would be to attempt to build a raft or a boat and simply row your way out towards civilization. There are unfortunately multiple problems with this idea. First of all, as mentioned previously, 93% of the island is covered by a glacier, and beneath that glacier is an active volcano. The sides of the island are therefore almost entirely sheer, vertical, icy cliffs, and the island doesn't really have any beaches for you to launch a ship or a raft off of. So even if you do somehow acquire a raft, what are you gonna do? Toss it off a cliff and then jump off the cliff yourself into the freezing Antarctic waters? Further, how are you going to build a raft? Like I said, there aren't any trees on Bouvet Island, and that means there isn't any wood. By some miracle, if you manage to find a perfectly seaworthy raft that's somehow washed up on the shoreline, where are you going to even row to? Tristan da Cunha is a tiny island, and the odds of you successfully hitting it are just slim to none. So, if you decide on rowing in the direction of South Africa instead, and if you could somehow manage to row even at an Olympic level, it would still take you more than 6 consecutive days of non-stop, continuous rowing without any breaks whatsoever to get there. So, in all reality, it would really take you several weeks, if not even months, to actually row to South Africa. And that's just assuming you even make it there without dying of exhaustion, thirst, hunger, or from the elements first. Okay, so escaping on your own from Bouvet is most likely a bad idea and probably not even possible. So what about just bunkering down on the island, surviving, and hopefully just waiting it out until someone else shows up? Well, this strategy probably isn't that much better. The island's harsh, freezing climate has seriously limited the amount of food that's available. The only non-animal life to speak of are restricted to fungi and moss, and they mostly grow in the few and far between snow-free areas of the island.
How is there even conditions where there's any plants that can grow there? I wouldn't have even assumed that would be possible. Life will find a way anywhere, right? But geez.
Problem here is that most of the snow-free areas, and therefore most of the fungi and moss, are located on land that is so steep they're subjected frequently to the threats of avalanches. So, good luck not getting crushed or buried. On the flip side though, animal life itself is rather plentiful. The island is one of the most important breeding colonies for several species of penguin, and there are often tens of thousands of them present on the island at a time. There are hundreds of thousands of other bird species present, and tens of thousands of seals as well. So if you can master hunting and are okay with eating birds or seals, you can have plenty of food to survive off of. The biggest problem for you though is that there's just no telling how long you'll need to survive doing all of this for. Ships and planes rarely ever travel by, and the odds of them seeing you when they do are slim to none. And the island is pretty often covered in fog, so when a plane flies overhead, they're probably just not ever going to see you. Your best bet would be to hold off and wait for an actual intentional trip to the island itself. But those are carried out very rarely. Weirdly enough, there are actually 3 planned expeditions to Bouvet Island led by the Norwegian government in each of the next 3 years in 2022, 23,
So,
and
if it happened in the next few years, maybe you'd be right. You've got only a whole year to wait for a ship to come and save you.
24, but that's generally not the case. Usually, there could be many, many years in between expeditions where no human is coming to visit at all. Meaning that depending on when you become stranded, the next people coming to visit could be up to a year or many years away from visiting. In fact, so few people have ever visited the island that it's estimated only about 100 people have ever actually been there throughout all of human history. To put that into perspective, there are more than 5 times as many humans who have been to space than have been to Bouvet Island. It's an insanely difficult place to get to, and if you ever reach it, you can join one of the most exclusive groups of people who have ever existed. As an example, this guy named Charles Valey visited the island back in 2003 and is widely acclaimed to be the world's most well-traveled person. In order to reach Bouvet, it took him a journey of 72 full days that culminated with a dangerous helicopter ride from his boat through freezing temperatures, dense fog, and 50-knot winds. It was literally only by a stroke of luck that he was even offered the trip in the first place aboard a South African research vessel that agreed to take him there while on their way to fix a nearby weather system. The point of all of this is that Bouvet Island is the world's most hardcore and extreme remote location. It's probably the singular most difficult location on the Earth to visit. And if you're unfortunate enough to get stranded there, escape is almost completely impossible. So probably don't ever go there alone, and if you do, you're probably going to want to take something with you to keep you occupied for the months or years it'll take until somebody comes to rescue you. Like, I don't know, a Super Duty editing or gaming PC. Well, that may actually be pretty tough since there isn't any electricity and there isn't any internet, but you know what isn't very hard? Actually building your own PC with
Getting his money, but god damn, man. Just imagine being that person. I mean, there's probably been cases where people have been stuck on remote islands, right? I don't know, planes crashed or something's happened and they've been stuck there, and then they've been stuck there for years or whatever. But just imagine that, like, just imagine the feeling of just not knowing where you are, not knowing how long it's going to be before you can get help or whatever. Like, Jesus. But in this situation, it's even worse than just being on any remote island, because you're somewhere where there's nothing other than snow and cold and wind and just absolute hell, to be honest. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this reaction. If you want more of this stuff, let me know in the comments. And yeah, until next time, like, subscribe,